This is Dead Male Tales. Let us know how we're doing by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, click the bell icon if you want to be notified when we find another letter. On with the story. My dearest Samantha, I should have been able to write this sooner, but I couldn't. What was meant to be a one-day road trip turned into 2 terrifying but interesting days. I feel like the world is trying to swallow me whole at this point. The only thing driving me forward, pushing me to see another sunrise, is you. And I hope that'll be enough to get me to Seattle. So far, a typical day's drive no longer seems possible, and I suppose I'll have to be okay with writing your letters several days apart. The only perk is I'll have plenty to write. After I left the reservoir, I stopped at an abandoned gas station to fill the tank in the van. There were a few cars left in the parking lot. I figured I'd try my luck. I used one of the siphons and made quick work of it. I didn't want to waste more daylight than necessary. Between 2 of the 3 vehicles there, I managed to get the van topped off. I decided to see if there was anything good left in the building. I was well stocked on food after I took the supplies from Curtis's camp, but I was looking for any other useful items. I managed to find a can opener, some fishing tackle, a few packs of jerky, and an old-fashioned road map. Although you and I had our fair share of road trips, I needed to easily find back roads just in case. I never thought I'd live my life based on just in case. I got back in the van and I opened the map to scope out the possible routes to bring me to Wallace Lake. I thought about continuing my trip via the trace, but I knew that would be the long way around. Daylight is now a resource I can't possibly waste. So instead, I took off to the right and hit the I-20. It's a risk, but it seems like I'm at a risk no matter what decisions I make. At least for now, I'll take the faster route. Cars and trucks were littering the highway. Most of them pulled off to the side and others sitting directly in the middle of the road. I had to wonder where those people went or why they would simply abandon their cars on the interstate. But I couldn't think about it for long. It made my arm hairs stand on end, and I didn't like the uneasy feeling trying to settle my stomach. Instead, I took my time weaving around cars as they came, picking up speed when I had open space. I was making good headway and got at least an hour of driving under my belt. Then I heard a sound no one wants to hear on a regular day. I definitely did not want to hear it when I was traveling alone on an abandoned interstate with infected possibly lingering in the woods along the roadside. The front passenger side tire made a loud pop, and while I cursed at the van, it wobbled slowly to a stop. Even without exiting the van, I knew it was a flat tire. My head hit the steering wheel. I sat there for a minute, angry and terrified of the new situation I was in. I know how to change a tire, as you know, but I never bought that new spare tire you told me to get several months ago when the other one had blown out. The worst part was, through all of my extensive preparation, I didn't even think about it until it blew. I'm hoping you felt my regret from Seattle, because at least then you would know I'm still alive and trying my best to get to you. Determined and losing daylight, I quickly climbed out of the van with my tire tool and began looking for a replacement tire. There were plenty on the road, but it was a matter of finding the right size. I had walked a long distance before I finally found one. It was still full of air and I managed to get it off quickly. It was heavy though, so I had to roll it all the way back to the van. Then I saw them. As I began walking over the small incline to get back to the van, I saw what looked like the ground moving in the distance. Though it wasn't the ground. Hundreds of those monsters were slowly making their way toward me. The horde's width was at least as wide as the road I was stranded on. I wasn't sure how many there were, but I couldn't see an end to them as they shambled along. I felt a chill run up my spine. There was no way I could drive my van through them without causing severe damage. I began weighing my options when I heard a noise on my left, down an embankment that led into the woods. It didn't sound like an infected, but I readied myself. Tire tool in hand, I prepared to lodge it into whatever was there. Help. It was the only word I needed to hear to make me move from my spot and run cautiously towards the road's shoulder. When I peered over the metal railing, I saw a man frantically climbing his way toward me. Panic gripped me. Behind him, ambling slowly because of the sun, was a group of infected. Their gurgles and moans made my stomach clench, but I could tell the man needed my help. "Up here," I said, waving at him. He looked up at me, fear in his eyes, and he climbed up the hill as fast as possible. I guess the thought of being rescued gave him the extra energy he needed to escape. The minute he reached me, I put my arm on his shoulder and guided him towards the van. He smelled rotten, like moldy clothing. I put that aside so I could get us both to safety. The horde was approaching, and there was no time to spare. I pushed the replacement tire under the van for later. Then I opened the back doors to the van and ushered him in. When I peered around the door to observe how close the infected were, my heart felt like it was in my throat. I could only hope they didn't see us get inside. Even Cash, following my lead, laid down and didn't make a sound. "Thank you," said the man. His body was shaking and he could barely keep his hands still. It was apparent he'd been through a lot, and I felt for him. I quietly rummaged through some clothing and found him something fresh to wear. He smiled and began changing out of his torn and dirty clothes. Not thinking, I asked him, "What were you doing down there?" "Escaping," he replied, "but barely." Before I could ask him any other questions, he lifted his shirt to show me a nasty bite on his side. My blood ran cold. I thought about what happened to Curtis and how little time it took for him to turn into one of those things. There was only one way that this was going to end for my new van mate, and I hated the idea of losing yet another human being. I just hope you haven't had to take a life or watch someone die. I hope that Seattle is peaceful. I think he noticed I was lost in thought while staring at the teeth marks in his skin, because he cleared his throat and said, "I'm aware I don't have much time, and I need you to do something for me." "Like what?" He handed me a piece of paper. It was wrinkled, like it had been in his pocket for days, and even had a few water stains that faded some of the ink. "That is probably the most important piece of paper in the world right now." I looked down at it and couldn't make any sense of what was written. A lot of numbers, formulas, and other jargon that I didn't understand. "This right here could be part of the cure. Sam, you know me. You know I'm not one to give people the benefit of the doubt, to try to believe what people tell me, but I wasn't sure how to absorb this information. Part of the cure? Was he serious? He must have seen that I was skeptical, because he began to tell me that he was a medical research scientist. He and his team had predicted an outbreak like the one we're in now. They'd been developing an antidote to counteract the decay of cell structure or something like that. He used big words that I can't spell. I'll just leave it at that. After everything went to hell, he was just trying to survive and was taken in by a shady paramilitary group that offered him protection. He decided to stay, which he said was his worst mistake. He didn't know exactly what they wanted from him, but he knew it wasn't anything good. Through all the chaos, he didn't get around to telling me how he escaped. Obviously, he managed since he was sitting there with me in the van. I could hear the moans and groans of the infected just outside our little sanctuary as they slowly passed by the van. After he told me his story, I looked down at that piece of paper again. Maybe he wasn't telling the truth. Perhaps he'd gone mad after all that happened. I have no way of knowing. It seems far-fetched, but so does everything about this world. If there is a 1 in a million chance this is real, I have to deliver the paper. I couldn't live with myself and not follow through with what I had promised. Honestly, I hated to think he wouldn't make it through the night. It still bothers me he couldn't deliver this information himself. The good news is, if there is such a thing as good news anymore, the delivery is, believe it or not, just east of Seattle. At least, if I do manage to hold on to this, I won't have to go out of my way to hand it off to the next person. Shortly after I promised him I would deliver it, he began to fall very ill. He was sweaty and breathing heavily, like he'd run a 10-mile marathon without stopping. He asked me later if I believed in God. I then told him about you and the gods of your ancestors. He actually smiled at me and looked relieved. Native Americans are the only healers I trust. It was nice to hear. It felt good to hear someone say that. I don't know what I believe anymore, but it was a beautiful sentiment. I hope that makes you smile like it did me. He was a kind man. You would have liked him. After we talked for a while, he handed me the old single-shot pistol he'd been carrying in his pocket. He told me he didn't want to turn into one of those creatures. I looked at it, then at him, and I understood what he wanted me to do. 2 months ago, I never thought I would have been the one to do something like that to save a person's humanity. His peaceful face haunts me, knowing that he was okay with it over the alternative. I never even got his name. This morning the road was clear. The horde must have been somewhere behind me, long gone. I got out, buried the man, changed the tire, and left for Wallace Lake. It was a smooth ride the rest of the way. We should vacation here when we're back together and all is right with the world. I will fight to get you, and eventually, this nightmare will end. That's what I choose to believe. I found a cabin near the lake where Cash and I can catch our breath over the next couple of days. I already left that bright yellow smiley face on the Wallace Lake sign. When I leave, I'll duct tape the letter on it. After looking at the map, my next planned stop is Lavon Lake, northeast of Dallas. I drew the route on the back of this paper. If you do eventually find these letters, you'll need to know where to go next. I miss you and love you with everything that I am. From the wasteland, Dalton.